All right, the time has come. I got a lot of work ahead of me on the 986 to fix that second gear grind issue that I've been having. I'm going to replace the second gear components. So I have those components over here on the workbench. We got the shift sleeve, actual second gear is in here, and the synchro, as well as a couple other components for second gear in there. So while I'm in there, and I have the transmission out, I might as well do the IMS bearing, right? So I got the IMS bearing from LN Engineering, as well as the toolkits that go with it. While we're in there, we might as well do the rear main seal, and we might as well replace the clutch, as well as the transmission mounts. So between all of this, it's a lot of work. Haven't done this before. I've replaced a clutch on an E92 before, but I haven't done this type of work on the 986. Haven't done an IMS bearing before, and haven't taken apart a transmission and replaced the second gear component, so that should be very interesting. All right, the car's in the air. It was a bit of a pain in the ass with this side. As you can see, it's pretty tight. I did it so it's out of the way as I'm working on it. We can still use this space in the garage. But got the creeper down here, so the next step is to get under here and start taking off components. So we'll start with the heat shield, and then we'll do the exhaust. One thing to point out is that if you have the stock exhaust, you're going to have to remove this rear bumper. On aftermarket exhaust, you're able to get to the bolts that bolt the exhaust to the transmission, but on the stock exhaust, it's too tight to get up in there, so you have to remove the bumper. I have a video where I showed you how to install the CircuitWorks exhaust, but in that video, I show you how to remove the rear bumper and take off the stock exhaust. All right, if we take a look under here, you can see the skid plate. We're going to have to take that guy off, as well as these braces that run alongside here. Now with that off, we're able to take off the sway bar. On the aftermarket exhaust, you can probably take it off without doing the sway bar first, but the sway bar has to come out anyway, so let's just get it out of the way. We got 2 bolts on either side here, and then you have the end links. These end links, you have to put a wrench in here and then get this bolt off here. To keep track of the bolts, I'm going to be doing some piles in order of the things I've taken off. I might end up marking some of these. If it starts to get wild, I start to get a lot of bolts here. But this should be enough to help me keep track. It's time to remove the exhaust. Got 2 bolts up there. We can access those since this is an aftermarket exhaust system. On your stock exhaust system, as mentioned before, you have to remove the bumper. So what we'll do is remove the 3 bolts up there. We'll remove, we'll remove these connections. We might drop this as just all one unit, the secondary pipes in the muffler. So probably just those bolts and those bolts up there. We have a choice to either remove the axles in this thing next or drain the fluids. I'm going to go ahead and drain the fluids, and then we'll do the axles and this brace. This thing's awesome. Got this off Amazon. I'll link it in the description below. Holds all of your random sockets, and see, we got the triple square, all the different things that don't normally come on a nice panel like this, but are very useful for jobs like this. So we'll find which one fit for these two, and we'll drain the oil. We'll get this pan ready just in case some oil wants to come out of this fill hole. Nothing. Just gonna put that back in loosely, then we'll crack open this drain plug. While that's draining, I'm going to go ahead and put this on the steering wheel. So just in case I lose my mind and forget to fill this with oil, this will be a reminder. Or if I get hit by a bus and my wife sells the car at the next owner, we'll know that it has no oil in it. While the engine and transmission are finishing draining, we'll start with these axles. So you'll want a long hex key. This is a size 8 here, and a breaker bar. To get clearance around this boot, you'll want that long hex, and these suckers are on tight. I already broke one loose. They're on there pretty good, so you'll want a breaker bar for that. So right now I have the e-brake on. I got this bolt broken loose. I'm going to release the e-brake, get this bolt up where this one is, so I have good access around this boot, and I can get that Allen key or that hex seated in there perfectly. You have to put a lot of force on these, and you don't want to strip it because then it'll be a pain in the butt. So these can be pretty gummed up from road debris and whatever else, so make sure that your hex is sitting as far in as possible. Take a look at the drain pan for the transmission fluid. This is what I would expect to see from a transmission that was grinding one of the gears. So you can see a few shavings and sparkles in here. So what we'll do is when we get the new second gear components in there, we'll get it nice and hot with the new fluid, drain it, and refill it with fresh fluid to try to flush out any remaining shavings that are in the transmission. Next, we'll remove this brace. So there are 2 bolts on the end of this brace, and then we'll remove this heat shield. All right, so what's next? We have to remove the shift cables up here, the transmission mounts, and the clutch slave cylinder over on the other side, as well as the reverse switch. So you press this button right here, pull this up. All right, so you have one clip up here, and then you have another clip over on this side. Let's see if I can reach up there and show you. Up there. Next, we'll take the slave cylinder off. I believe it's that bolt up there. Let's see. Now we can remove these shift cables. This transmission mount bracket's sort of in the way here. I think it'll make a pain to release this clip up here that you have to squeeze. So I'm going to support the engine, support the transmission, and then I think I'll take off these transmission mounts, then do the shifter cables. For these shift cables, I believe you take 2 flathead screwdrivers and just pry underneath. So you go underneath and twist. Before we do that, let's take these out of here, at least squeeze them and try to wiggle these out a little bit so that when we pry on this, it has room to flex over here. Got this top one loose. What I did is I took some needle nose and I squeezed this, and then with my other hand, I got behind it and wiggled it out. Removing the shifter cable ball ends was actually not that easy. Ended up using this trim tool here, got under them and pried very hard to get them off. So you need something like this, maybe something a little bit longer to get more leverage, but I really had to crank on them to get them to pop off. Everything's removed from the transmission, so we can now start unbolting the transmission from the engine. All right, I have all of the bolts removed from the transmission. The only 2 that were tricky were the top one and this guy here, the triple square one. So this top one, I used a combination of extensions and wobble socket to be able to get up there. So I went over from the driver's side on top of the transmission to get to that bolt. Kept enough pressure so that this stayed on the bolt. And then for the triple square one, you're really tight on space in there. So I got lucky in that this wrench with this socket on here fit in there just barely between the bolt and the transmission. If this was a millimeter longer or from here to here, it wouldn't have fit. So this one might give you some trouble. You might end up having to take one of your sockets, one of your triple squares, and cutting it to be able to get enough clearance, and then using something like a box end wrench on top of that there. What I had to do too, since this is a shorter wrench, is I had to put this 26mm wrench on the end of it. So I put this over the edge here like this to get some extra leverage, and then carefully keep it enough pressure to keep this seated. Just broke that loose. I was still able to get the socket out just barely, and then I threaded the rest of it out by hand. Make sure you keep track of the order of these bolts as they are different lengths. You can see the length difference on the back. This bottom bolt actually has a nut on the back. So if you're looking at the back of the transmission, this very bottom one has a nut on the back. These all were 16mm, except for this one. This was a 15mm. And then this was a M10 triple square. The transmission is now fully disconnected from the engine and everything else. So we can now pull it away from the engine and lower it down. Now that the transmission's out of the way, we can take off the pressure plate. So we're going to take these screws out here. I'm going to use the impact gun here, put on a mask for the dust. We'll see if these come loose without locking anything in place. Show you guys the old clutch versus the new clutch, how much the old clutch is worn down. So you can see that the grooves on the side are pretty much worn down. Still have a little bit of life left on this clutch, it looks like, but it's good to see that it doesn't look brand new. It doesn't look like it has a ton of life left on it. It's quite a bit worn down compared to the new clutch. Now we can remove the flywheel. Same process. We need a T55 Torx. Have the flywheel off. I think it's safe to say that this rear main seal is on its way out. It's leaking pretty good. That might be what all of this residue is from. Looks like the IMS is the stock IMS. This doesn't look like it's replaced. Now, to do the IMS bearing, we have to put the engine in top dead center and lock the camshafts in place. So I have the top in service mode to move the speaker back, and then I took out the carpet that sits along here. So the carpet has these little notches that it hooks over. So moving that speaker back allows you to pull up this carpet. If you want to make it even easier on yourself, just remove the speaker, remove this carpet, so that you can get this out. It's tucked in behind here. Just start pulling on it and lift it over these screws. Okay, now we just have to remove these screws all the way around this cover, and we can gain access to the front of the engine. Alright, I have the engine locked in at top dead center. There's a pin tool that they give you in the toolkit. So I took a socket and a wrench here, turned the engine over slightly and put that pin in. So the pin goes into the hole that looks like a teardrop. And where it slides in is at about 11 o'clock. So you turn over slowly and keep wiggling that pin into place until it slides. And then to make sure that you're fully locked in, you can try turning on that ratchet again to see if you can turn the engine over. You should not be able to turn it over with that pin locked in place. So now that we have the crank locked into place, we need to lock the camshafts into place. I believe on the driver's side, we lock it from the rear, and on the passenger side, we lock it from the front here. So we'll go underneath, pop the caps off of the cams, and take a look at how we do that. So what we're looking for is equivalent to this green cap up here, but lower on the engine. It's sort of behind the support bar. So if I go under here, you can see it right up here. So we need to take that cap off to be able to lock the cam into place. And so we're on the driver's side of the car. So we'll lock this into place. Then we need to go over to the passenger side of the car and lock that cam into place. But we'll be accessing it from the other side of the engine. Here's a look at the replacement caps. How we get these out is we take a pick tool and we'll poke a hole in the center of the cap and pry it out. I hear that it's very tough to get to the edge of the cap and pry it out, so people just poke a hole through it with a pick tool and then pry it out. Alright, so I took the caps off over on this side, and I have this cam locking tool in place. It was actually tough to get into position. Didn't seem to line up right, so I went up there and I took out the locking pin and I rotated 180 degrees, and it seemed to line up a little bit better. Now I don't know if that's just because I had like pressure on the crank when I was trying to see if the locking tool was all the way in place, but when I rotated 180 degrees, it seemed to line up a little bit better. It still didn't slot in too easily, so maybe my timing is slightly off on this, but the tool's in place. What's a little bit confusing to me is I took these two caps off on this side, got it locked into place, and on the other side from the front of the engine, let's go over there and take a look at that. So from the top here we can see the two cam slots here. I have the top one marked, try to get the light on this. I have the top one marked with a Sharpie, even though it's straight up and down, just to see if it moves once I take the IMS out. And then I have the single cam locking tool in the bottom cam. Now I did that one by a combination of above and below. It's actually easier to get to from below. This kit included only two new cam plugs. Now I destroyed 4 of them, so I had to poke a hole through them, but it only came with 2, so I'm not sure with this kit if they expect you to just lock one side of the engine. Feel free to comment below and if you think that's the case. This is the first time I'm doing this, I'm not really sure. So just to be safe, I used a single locking tool on the other side, but we'll see. Hopefully that top cam doesn't move. Now that the camshafts are locked, we can remove the chain tensioners. So you remove the chain tensioner right here, and then there's another one up over here, right there. So it's a 32 millimeter socket. Take both of these out. There'll be a little bit of oil that comes out, so have your drain pan and some rags ready to catch that oil. I have both the timing chain tensioners removed, 2 oil pans under here to catch the drips for now. Now we can take off the cover for the IMS bearing. Before we take these 3 bolts out, we actually need to break loose this one in the center. We do that with a pass-through wrench. So you might be able to see that there's a spot for a flathead in the middle there. You need to hold the bolt with the wrench and hold this centerpiece with the flathead. So you put this through the pass-through wrench and hold the centerpiece and break the bolt loose. With all of those screws out, we now need to pry on this cover just slightly. You don't have to use much force. You want to be careful not to damage anything, but we'll get behind this with the flathead and slowly pry it away from the engine. Got the cover removed. Probably should have been a little bit more gentle with those flathead screwdrivers. Ended up marring up the case a little bit. I think it'll be okay because that's not really a sealing surface around the edge. Next, we remove this snap ring here. So grab your snap ring pliers, go in there, grab it, squeeze, and wiggle it out. Snap ring looks like this, so you squeeze, rotate, and pull the snap ring out. Alright, so I have the hex adapter on there and the bearing puller along with the screw. Now you pull this cup back, hold on to that little hex adapter, and then thread the screw into place. Then once this is in place, we're going to slide this cup here, and then we'll tighten this screw, this bolt, all the way down and start pulling out the bearing. Just like that, the bearing's removed. After 120,000 miles, this bearing looks perfect. Actually, absolutely no play in it. So with this rear main seal, it's pretty simple. We get this old seal out. I'm gonna try it with a pick tool first. And then with the new rear main seal, we have this tool here. So we get the new seal in there evenly as much as we can. And then we put this tool over the top, tighten it down in 2 of those bolts, and just make the tool go flush. Once the tool's flush, then the seal is where it needs to be. All right, I finally got the old rear main seal out. As you can see, it's a bit mutilated. Hopefully junk didn't fall into the engine. It wasn't easy. What I had to do was I had this pick tool and a screwdriver. What I did is I put the screwdriver like this as a brace, and I got the pick tool, which has a slight bend to it that way, in from the inside towards the center hub here, behind the seal, and then leveraged it over that screwdriver. So just pulled it from behind, and I just worked around, and eventually it popped out. All right, with the new seal, they say that you put this all the way down with those screws. So you put the new seal in, and then you tighten this all the way down. So it's a little uneven. This side's up. I'm going to start tightening this side down first, see if it... Yep, starting to even out here. Now to install the bearing. So we have this plate that came with the toolkit. Got this secured up with the bolts that it came with. And now we're following the instructions that were at the bottom of the toolkit. So we'll follow these. If you have this toolkit, you should get them as well. First step is installing that plate, and then we'll get ready to install the bearing. So we have the mounting plate up there on the car. It's tricky to center it. You got this ring, you have to get this lip perfectly centered on the IMS. So we have the locking ring on the new bearing. We have to place the new bearing into this sleeve, and then it all goes into this component here, this direction. So I put a little bit of oil on the inside of the sleeve, and we'll be putting the new bearing into this sleeve. So you install the new bearing with the ring on it into the tapered end of the sleeve. So we'll put this right in like this. With that tapered end, it should go in nice and smooth. And you can push it pretty close to the edge, like that. All right, here's how this is assembled. You have your larger nut on the outside, your washer, the smaller nut on the inside. We'll pull this out. You have the bearing. This is just the bearing for the tool. Put this into here. Let that slide down. into this tool. The groove side is up towards the top of that tool. You have your bearing in here with the small groove over here. The tapered end is on the inside where we slid the bearing in. So this is going on this side like this, but we're going to insert this into the tool first. So to make sure that bearing stays into place, we'll do it like this and then flip it over. And we'll take the bearing, put it right up top like this. I'm going to let this fall backwards like this. So now what we have here is that this ring is just on the edge here. The bearing is pressed in slightly, and we're going to thread this onto the plate on the car and then use this bolt to press the bearing in. Okay, this is nice and snug. Now they tell you to lock this collar down. It's probably not 100% necessary, but let's follow the instructions. This is nice and snugged onto there. So now what we need to do is start tightening this. So loosen this outer nut. I'm gonna hold this inner nut here and start screwing this down. And what we should see is this silver piece start to press in. All right, I have a 12mm socket on here. I backed this nut off, and then a 21mm wrench on here. And I'm just going through, tighten this, and we should see that silver piece press in. Okay, I can see it pressing in, so that means the bearing is being pushed in. So we'll just keep going here until it bottoms out. They say we should hear a click when that ring locks into place. So we'll see. Okay, that got pretty tight. I didn't hear the pin click into place, but what we'll do is we'll take this off and we'll take this off here and see if the bearing's pushed all the way in. And just like that, the new bearing's installed. You can see the new bearing is pressed all the way in, slight recess all the way around, and this is looking perfect. So now we can remove this mounting plate and get the plate that goes on the IMS bearing on. What worked the best to get this seated down all the way, takes a bit of force, is this 19mm in the center. So you put this in the center here, you take a hammer and you hit it, and I was able to get it to sit down pretty much flush. And then I tap around these edges, and you can hear the difference when you're tapping this. It's more of a dull thud than when it's lifted up. It's more of a ringing sound or ping sound. And then you can look back here and make sure that this is all the way seated down. Okay, all of the bolts are tightened down by hand. We have our torque wrench sent to 10 Newton meters. We're gonna go around and tighten these all down. Okay, next step is to install the flange nut. They say to install a little bit of sealant on here. I'm not sure if it matters what type of sealant. The one I'm using is Gasket Maker. This is what I had. It tells you to use Coril T there. So if you want to be extra safe, go ahead and use that. We're going to apply just a little bit on the edge of this, just like that. Now this says to let set for 1 minute, so I'm going to let this hang out for 1 minute, and then I'll put it on the IMS bearing. Okay, we have that torqued down by hand. Now we'll torque it to 10 Newton meters. All right, the IMS bearing install is complete. Now we can reinstall the cam tensioners and remove the cam locking tools. When I went to pick up the timing chain tensioner, it actually popped apart. This is the one that goes on the passenger side underneath the car. So this one popped apart on me, so I actually had to order a new one. It's probably good that I figured this out before putting this back in the car and having it pop apart. Ordered the other side just to be safe because I had it out. Nothing appears to be wrong with this one, but while I'm there, might as well replace it, given that this one failed. I'm not sure if it's necessary, but I soaked these in some oil beforehand. Had a little cup of oil over here. Push the plunger in a little bit, make sure it's all coated in oil, get this O-ring coated in oil. It's a little bit messy, but it'll help lubricate these when they go in. Double and triple checked on the internet. This is the passenger side, so the one that goes underneath on the passenger side. This is the driver's side, the one that goes in from the side. It's very unclear looking that up on the internet, but double checked. You can also check from the number of rings on the side of these, or on the top of these. This is supposed to help you figure out where they go. This has one big ring. This has 2 rings. Now I didn't see the 2 rings on the engine, but I did see a marking for one big ring that lines up with this. And I don't think I switched these. Mark this for passenger, this for drivers. So hopefully this is the right orientation. All right, reinstalling the passenger side. Be sure to replace these crush washers on the timing chain tensioners before you install them. It's actually pretty tough to get started. You have to put pressure up on the tensioner and then screw it in. There we go, that's the trick. Use your palm. We'll twist this in. Same issue with this one, it's tough to get started. And to hold there. Let's try to get this O2 sensor out of the way. Trying to get 2 hands up there, one to compress it, one to turn it. Take a 32 millimeter and tighten these down, and the torque spec is 59 foot-pounds. Now that we have the timing chain tensioners put back, we can remove the cam locking tools. Remember, we have one up here held in with one bolt, and then we have one on the other side of the engine just holding in the bottom cam. So we take those 2 bolts out, and then we'll be able to put the caps back in the camshaft covers here. So before we put the caps on, let's check the timing on these. It looks like they haven't shifted. I marked this top one. I know it's tough to see, but I marked the top cam with some Sharpie. Bottom one was locked in. Looks like it's in the exact same place. If we go around to under the car, you can see that these cams are in the same place as well. These cams were locked into place and they haven't shifted, but what we'll do is we'll turn the engine over 360 degrees, make sure that there's no resistance, nothing colliding, and then we'll put those cam caps back on. Turn the engine over a few times. It felt normal, no contact was felt. Visually, the cams were in the exact same place, so I think we're all good and timing hasn't shifted. So now we can put these, what they call cylinder head plug, the caps for the camshafts. We're gonna put these back on the engine. They just push into place, nothing special about them. With those camshaft plugs installed now, we're officially done with the IMS install. That's the end of the instructions that they give you. So now we can move on to the transmission. So we can put the flywheel and new clutch on the car, or we can start by splitting this transmission. I think I'll put the flywheel and new clutch on first, and then I will split this transmission and replace second gear.